Hello, and welcome to the Washington Monthly. I'm your host, Ann Kim.
And I'm your co-host, Garrett Epps.
In this episode, we talk about the art of book reviews and why they matter in a post-literate world.
The book reviewer is often like the first reader, somebody who models a kind of response that you want people out there to have as well, within limits. I always try to go back a little bit and leave room for some judgment that people might have that might be different from mine. But the first approach is essentially one of, I wouldn't describe it as reverence, but appreciation.
My guest is Christoph Irmscher, Distinguished Professor of English at Indiana University. Professor Irmscher is one of two winners of the Washington Monthly's 2025 Kukula Award for book reviews. He wrote about Arlie Russell Hochschild's book, Stolen Pride: Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. Welcome, Christoph, and congratulations on the award.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So you wrote about Arlie Russell Hochschild's book, Stolen Pride, Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. And it was a sequel to her first book, Strangers in Their Own Land, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. And that book was widely viewed as one of the best scholarly works out there to explain the rise of the right. So given that context, why did you choose to review Stolen Pride, and what were you hoping to achieve by choosing this book and write about it?
I came across it by accident, just seeing it in a catalog. And I do different types of reviewing. I do reviews that are commissioned, and sometimes I pitch reviews. Sometimes they're reviews I just want to write. And from reading about Stolen Pride, it seemed imperative to me that this was something that needs to be written about. I got a copy from the publisher, started reading it, and submitted it to not one of the venues I usually work for. Counterpunch is a very small operation, left-leaning magazine, run by Jeffrey St. Clair as the senior editor. And this was something I wanted to be free to write what I liked about this book, because it seemed really important to me. Not be constrained by word limit, not so much constrained by considerations of audience. This is something that I wanted to have time to write about. I wanted to have space to write about. And when I started reading it, it pretty much confirmed what I thought it would be, a book that's very much for our current moment, that talks about the political divide and what can be done about it. The context was also that I was teaching a senior seminar at the time on polarization. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? So this book seemed to fit into our discussions in class. And what had impressed me about Strangers in the Land is Arlie Hochschild's generosity. She talks about something she calls the empathy bridge, that we need to build bridges between sides that seem irreconcilable when you first look at them, which seemed to me a very attractive idea. I was surrounded by so much division, so much anger as well. And for my own sake, I needed to find something that would help me think about what was happening differently. And the coincidence was, in a sense, or probably not a coincidence, in some ways, her first book essentially came out when the first Trump term was underway. The second book just came out when the second Trump term, which many of us, including myself, did not expect to happen, when that was a reality. And I needed a lifeline. So there was a more personal investment in the topic. And the very notion of this Berkeley professor walking into communities in Kentucky, which is not far from where I teach, and trying to find a basis for conversations seemed really appealing to me. And when I read the book, my expectations were really confirmed, actually surpassed by what she'd done. The other kind of reason why I did want to write about it is that she has a very unique style, which I knew from my previous work. It's academic in some ways, so you will find the endnotes, you will find documentation, you will find evidence. But she also has a very strong narrative tendency, and she knows how to tell a story well and over many, many pages. And she has a sense for language. It is not overtly literary in the sense that she's reaching for effects that are extraneous to what she wants to do. But there's a grasp of words that she has that allows her to say the things she wants to say in the simplest possible way, but also in a way that's often very beautiful. And that's something that resonated with me.
So did she succeed in building the empathy bridge that you call it for you? Like, what did you learn about the rise of the right and people who are within the MAGA fold that you didn't know before, particularly from reading her first book? Like, what additional insights did you feel that she brought this time around?
In her first book, what really impressed me at the end, she's essentially sort of imagining herself writing two different letters. A letter to uh, folks on the left, telling them, if you talk to these people, if you try to understand them, people who didn't vote the way you did, you will find a common ground that you wouldn't expect. There are certain ideas about how to live a life, how to take care of a family, how to take care of the environment, for instance, that are not at all different once you get to the bottom of it. And then she had another letter addressed to the liberals, essentially making the same point, that you need to get beyond certain preconceptions you have about people who think differently from you. And I came to Stolen Pride with these two sort of letters in mind. And what I found was an attention to the lives of different people, because the way the book is organized essentially is by delving into the stories of different people and listening. And this kind of care that's, I would say, is even stronger than in the first book. The attentiveness to giving people the space to say what they want to say and to not judging them is kind of a model that, for me at least, in my own interactions, not that I live up to it and all the time, or that I'm able to do the same kind of thing, but just being exposed to being trained to listen. In the book, it's a book that requires you to keep reading. You can't just dip into it because it wouldn't make sense to you. You have to be part of the story that she takes you into. And I think patience is probably the word that comes to mind. It's sort of an education in patience, in needing you to hear people out and to also hear yourself out as you are reading the book, to listen to your own responses to it and to recognize your own moments of impatience and anger. And there are definitely moments in these stories where you're allowed to say, okay, this is something that I just can't agree with, and I have to remove myself. There's no common ground in this particular regard. But then, as she will tell you, there might be something else that you can latch on to. And for me, one of the takeaways, and this is how I ended my review, is essentially the notion that education is so important, and that education is something that is not equitably available to people often in these communities. And she makes a very strong point as to what education can do to some of the people that she's met, because it allows you to step outside of your bubble and to really view yourself not immersed in the kind of world of hurt that you might be part of. Some of it legitimate, some of it whipped up by sort of national discourse, but it allows you to step out for a moment, look at yourself and understand yourself as being enmeshed in something that is not of your own making. And the irony to me is that right now in the climate that we are experiencing, these educational community opportunities are being cut, defunded, or diminished in ways that work actually against the people who need these opportunities to be made available to them. And that was my own personal takeaway. It's not the most important point that Arlie is making, but it's something that I, as a reviewer, given the world that I'm in, latched onto, because to me, this was a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm. How did you interpret the title of her book, Stolen Pride? And how do you connect that to polarization that you've been observing and the current moment that we're in?
It's an interesting question, because stolen kind of raises the question, who's stealing it?
Who's doing the stealing, right?
Who's doing the stealing? And the answer is kind of in the book twofold, or maybe even threefold. On the one hand, there's a very definite sense, and she acknowledges that too, that things are being taken away from these people. And that has to do with the power of the urban centers, as she puts it, with opportunities being taken away from the country, the rural urban division that's exacerbated, and that has to do with sort of with the way capital is being amassed in certain areas of the country, taken away from other areas. So there's definitely some stealing that is being done on a sort of national level as well. There is some stealing that's being done by politicians who essentially move into election cycles with very targeted messages that really, in a sense, steal the narratives of these people and appropriate them for themselves in ways that, as the book makes very clear, are not responsible at all. The third kind of component of stealing is the stealing that you do to yourself by remaining in the situation that you're in, by sort of depriving yourself of opportunities that once you start thinking about where you are, might actually look very different. The whole narrative might look different to you. So it's a very resonant kind of message. And pride as a word, something that is complicated. I mean, I would describe Arlie's approach to her subject as humility, actually, because she walks into these situations, into these narratives, into these dialogues, the conversations, not as a proud person, not as somebody who really insists on her privilege, but tries to check it at the door, really. But at the same time, there's also a sense that this is not something she's saying about herself, but that she's implying about the people she speaks to, that they're entitled to being proud of who they are, because they've been told for many, many years that being who they are is nothing to be proud of. And I see this when I teach my students who come from the more rural parts of Indiana, or for that matter, from Kentucky, that they arrive here at school feeling in many, many ways that they are at a disadvantage, because they're not coming from these privileges. They're not coming from families where parents had time to take them for violin lessons or games or something like that on weekends. And they feel that they are arriving, like essentially in a state that doesn't allow them equitable access to the educational opportunities. And there is a very clear sense in the book that there is something people should be.
Yeah. 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 I thought the use of the word pride was really interesting because typically on the left, the word that is often used in contexts like these is dignity. And that has a different connotation than pride.
Yeah, which is also being currently hijacked for different reasons. We have the dignity tax now. I saw that just yesterday, for example. So language, what we see happening right now is how words have meanings attached to them that really change what they are, or how new words are being added. And which is why I appreciate this book so much, because as I mentioned before, it's written in a relatively simple, non-academic language. But you're kind of discovering as you read it the beauty of these words that are being used the way they're intended to be used. Because we are surrounded. I mean, even in my own academic world, I've seen the language change over the last year even. Suddenly we don't have administrators anymore. We have leaders. And we don't have salaries. We get rewards. The faculty rewards page we need to access. And it's very interesting to see how words shift their meaning, and to read a book that sort of restores language to a very clear sense that words mean something and that there's something attached to it that's important, and you can't just change words. That to me is a very striking thing as well.
I want to switch gears a little bit now and turn to talking about the importance of what you do, the importance of book reviews, and especially in the light of two countervailing trends. So on the one hand, there's more and more content all the time. We're flooded by it. Just in terms of books, not even talking about digital and videos and posts, etc. UNESCO says that there are more than 2 million books that are published every year. But then on the other hand, Americans are actually reading fewer books.
Yes,
There's a
yeah.
survey that the National Endowment for the Arts does fairly frequently, and the most recent one says that in 2024, just 48% of Americans read at least one book, compared to 55% 10 years ago. So given what's happened with reading, with publishing, with content, how do you see the function of book reviews in the current climate? Why do we need them?
That's a very interesting and complex question. I started reviewing books because of other book reviews I read that I loved. And I felt there was something about the art form that was just really beautiful in a limited space, to essentially broker a kind of connection between a book and the readers out there, a book that you felt should be read. Um, I have a very kind of personal approach to book reviewing, which might not be the one of some other folks, because I'm thinking of Elizabeth Hardwick, The Decline of Book Reviewing, where she says, among other things, today a modern Keats might go to his grave unread, but he will not go to his grave unpraised, essentially, by which she was saying that book reviews tend to be two-faced. I approach reviewing from the premise that somebody has put work into a book that I need to recognize and that I need to appreciate. I'm very much sort of in the corner. No one evokes John Updike anymore, but for those purposes, the rules he has for book reviewing, there are actually 6 of them. They're all based on trying first to understand where the author is coming from. Secondly, if you have something, let the book speak for itself. Incorporate sections from the book. Don't give away the ending, which is important when you review fiction. But also, if you feel that you need to criticize the book, find something else by that author that you can mention in a favorable context. I'm not saying that Updike always kept to that. He wrote some pretty savage reviews. But for me, there's essentially sort of I use the word humility, and I would not describe myself as a humble person necessarily, but there's I walk into this understanding that the author is more important than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that I want to tell readers who might want to decide whether this is a book they should read or not. So my function is that of a mediator, which also means that I should not try to attract too much attention to myself. And I feel that a book reviewer is often like the first reader, somebody who models a kind of response that you want people out there to have as well, within limits. I always try to pull back a little bit and leave room for some judgment that people might have that might be different from mine. But the first approach is essentially one of, I wouldn't describe it as reverence, but appreciation. Since I've written books myself, I know how much work goes into that. And I know there's many, many books out there. I know that my decision to pitch for a book review or to accept a commission also is a sort of filtering in a way. And there's many books out there who actually go unread. It's always back in my mind, this kind of concern. But what's very, very important to me is that I tell a story about a book. Reviews are a form of storytelling. It's essentially sort of a story about my reading experience. It's also a form of listening, and listening to the book, being careful in terms of what you choose. So I'm not somebody who skims books that I review, even if this means I have to put more time in it. I read every book twice at least, and I make excerpts from it before I take notes even. And actually writing down excerpts, even by hand, which I do very, very often, is for me a form of listening too, because once you copy a sentence, you actually get a feeling for the author's writing. You get a feeling for the prose. You get a feeling for the rhythm of the prose. It becomes sort of a visceral experience almost, and a way of merging with what the book is doing. So all of these factors play into that. So I'm generally somebody who probably errs on the side of wanting to understand and wanting to be favorable about a book. I do not enjoy pans, and I've written very few. I remember there was once one of the first reviews I wrote, I came up with a very clever metaphor, and I was very proud of it. It was a biography of um, uh, Teddy Roosevelt, and it was a big book. And the joke somehow came to me that if this book were an animal, TR would have tried to shoot it, and I was very proud of it. And when I now look back at this review, it was over a decade ago, the metaphor distracts really from what follows. It was a cheap shot in some ways. I mean, I was proud of it, talking about pride, but it wasn't necessarily in the service of it, and it was making an argument that had nothing to do with what the book was doing. And I tend to sort of move away from this type of writing or call myself out when I do that.
Right. Now, unfortunately, a lot of outlets are ending book reviews. Most recently, the Associated Press recently announced that it would no longer be publishing reviews, although it would cover the publishing industry. What are we losing when we don't have reviews? I mean, I guess it's the flip side of the question I asked you, in a
Yeah.
way. But what is the loss to readers? What is the loss to the public? What is the
We are
loss to
losing
authors?
we are losing several things. If I may take some examples, I occasionally write for the Wall Street Journal. I review for the Wall Street Journal, and I was essentially trained, and this is probably the right word to say, by someone I admire to this day, Chris Carduff, who was in charge of the book review, who passed away 2 years ago. Um, uh, um, and Chris thought of the weekend book review section essentially as a conversation, as a sort of symphony of voices that he was arranging very, very carefully. And there was nothing accidental to it. He came to one of my book reviewing classes. I teach classes on book reviewing here as well. And he made my students read several weekend sections and asked them what they thought. And it emerged when he met with us via Zoom. What emerged was really interesting to see how he had thought of these different voices as somehow talking to each other, which might not be obvious to somebody who just opens the section and reads through it. But once we kept asking questions about it, it became clear to my students even that there was really something very important that was happening. It was a cultural conversation in a way that we are losing. One of my students asked very critically. There was a review that came from a very kind of conservative spectrum and made a couple of points that all my students disagreed with. And Chris said something very remarkable. He said, the world of culture, the world of reading, the world of books is so large that there's room for that voice as well, which was sort of a beautiful, nice thing to say. And I think this kind of a notion of a cultural conversation that we are losing, that is what we are losing when we cut book reviews, when we don't publish these book reviews. I'm also a member of the National Book Critics Circle, of the board of the National Book Critics Circle, and the conversations that we are having about books we read, the excitement that books generate in us, is something very beautiful to see, and how we sometimes push against each other, but how we then come to an agreement about certain books, and elevating writers, which is really the purpose of the National Book Critics Circle, is an amazing thing to do. And you lose that kind of additional push that writers need. We cannot exist without writers. We cannot exist without the voices of writers. We cannot exist without books in whatever form, whether you read them in print or in electronic form. They are so important. They so determine how the way we think, that we just cannot do without them. If they get replaced by video games or by movies or by TikTok scrolling and so forth, it is not the same message to us as to how one should lead a life, because this is what books are really about. They are about decisions we make about how to lead our lives, whether they are novels that impact us in that way, or Stolen Pride that tells us something about empathy, or poems that stick with us, lines that come back to us in situations where we need them. This is a dimension that has existed for thousands of years, and we cannot do without it today. It's an impoverishment, really. And book reviews play a very important mediatory function in that kind of ecosystem of words that makes us who we are.
Now, how would you distinguish, and you refer to this as the art of the book review, the art of the book review, like what you do, what professional critics do, harken back to the H.L. Menkins of the world. Because in a way, from the review, because in a way, what the internet has done has actually cheapened the concept of review. At the same time, the professional reviewers are disappearing. Amateur reviewer has hijacked a lot of this conversation that you're talking about. Um, what is the particular value of the professional critic, the professional review that they offer versus the occasional reader on Goodreads, who puts up the 3-star review with a paragraph?
Exactly. Not talking about myself, because this would not be a particularly humble thing, just talking about critics I admire. And I've been impressed as I was learning how to do book reviews, and it was a learning experience, how much time they put into reviewing. Not just reading the book carefully, but looking at other books by the same writer. Sometimes many of them, before trying to understand what this new book is doing. This is work that is not richly compensated at all. And at the end of all, that might be just a 1,000 word review. That's all. But it doesn't show the weeks of work and thinking and the revisions that go into it. It doesn't acknowledge the revisions that other people make when you publish something. It doesn't acknowledge the editors, the proofreaders, the fact checkers who work on a review. Sometimes when a review comes out, 4, 5, 6 different people have weighed in on it, which is an amazing thing. This is very different from somebody who picks a book and has a gut reaction to it, by which I do not imply that these gut reactions are not valid. They can play a part in the whole system of how a book gets put out and is being read by the people out there. But professional book reviews, if they're good, live up to a standard that is much, much higher. And that is really, it's a service to the book. It's a service to readers. It is also, and this should be mentioned as well, it's also, if it's done well, a thing of beauty. A really good review is an artifact and is something that, when you look at it, and that sometimes happens to me, and I look at my reviews, and you have a feeling, this is perfect. This sounds immodest, but at least it is as best as I can make it. That's probably a better way to put it. And the words seem to be in the right places. Often this is after 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 drafts. And I realize how much better review gets when I actually take things out, which is a very, very hard thing to do. And a book review teaches you to do that as well, because you do have a word limit. You do have constraints you have to fulfill. And you find out that there are certain things that just don't need to be said, which is a very hard thing to accept when you are on draft 4. But by the time you get to the 10th draft, you realize why certain things shouldn't be in there. And sometimes it needs an external reader, an editor, to tell you, you don't really want that, right? Or that's not what you mean to say. And you look back and you go like, yes. So I would say it's an intellectual experience to write a book review. And it comes with and this is kind of selfish to say, but it comes with aesthetic satisfaction at the end when you've done something well. To the best of your ability. Sorry.
I want to turn to what the judges for this year's Kukula Award have said about your review of Stolen Pride. Judge Judy Pasternak wrote that your review, quote, brings insights of his own to a subject that couldn't be more timely or crucial to the continuation of our democracy. Second judge, Alan Gelzo, wrote, incisive without being condescending to the subjects of the book, Irmscher seemed to be writing from felt pain. That kind of empathy is in short supply these days. So you talked about this really intensive process that goes into each review. How did you go about writing this particular review?
I did some of the things that I usually do. I first read the book without taking notes. I make some marginal kind of notes, passages that I like, but I read the entire book and I single out sections that seem particularly important to me. Sometimes I use post-it notes, but more often than not, it's just using it's a pen usually. I do not use a pencil because I want things to be recognizable when I return. That's very important to me. So that's the first reading. The second reading, I focus on passages, and I again read the entire book, but I spend more time on the passages that I've singled out as particularly relevant. And then a story emerges, usually for me, from these excerpts. I sort of arrange them in a certain narrative. And what I usually do after that, which is sort of part of my work on a book review, I go for a walk and compose things in my mind. Not taking notes, but composing them in my mind. Sometimes certain words even emerge that I do want to use, concepts or words. And then I keep, in a very old-fashioned way, I always have notebooks with me, sort of usually small ones. This is one my daughter got me from Italy, so often there are stories kind of associated with it. And I write in these notebooks, so I take notes on every single page. And so I don't type anything. And then the first draft kind of emerges, and very often there's a beginning that comes to mind, a way I would like to start a review. In this particular, with this particular review, the political context obviously seemed important to mention. Sometimes with other reviews, it's a story, it's an anecdote, it's an experience. And often a visual thing that I connect with my reading experience. Sometimes they might be personal experiences as well. I try to be not to be autobiographical, but often there's sort of an association that I just have that determines my reading. And then I write it out with a notebook next to me, and I try to combine the passages and try to develop a story around them. With Stolen Pride, one of the things that obviously suggested itself, since it was sort of it's a panorama of lives that she unfolds, and there were certain lives that I wanted to focus on. There were others I didn't mention, and it's very important, as Updike says, give a sense of how the book is made. Quote from the book, offer passages, give the book a voice. Don't suffocate. Don't smother the book with the things you have to say about it, but make sure that the voice of the author is allowed in.
Well, thank you, Christoph. This has been like a fascinating insight into how professional reviewers do their craft. It was a pleasure to meet you, and congratulations again.
Thank you again, and thanks for spending so much time with me.
That's it for this week from the Washington Monthly. I'm Ann Kim, and on behalf of my co-host, Garrett Epps, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful week.